The coyotes had been louder than usual the night before. Something in the air, maybe the brittle wind, maybe the emptiness of it all, set them off just past midnight. But Harlan Reeves didn't stir. He hadn't stirred for anything in years. Until now. He stood on the front porch of his ranch house, shotgun resting in one hand, half a mug of coffee in the other, long since gone cold. His eyes squinted against the glare rising over the dry hills of Willow Bend, Arizona. Something wasn't right. The wind carried more than dust that morning. It carried music. Harlan froze. Not the sharp whistle of birds or the screech of fence wire in the gusts. Real music. Human voices. Faint, soft, almost impossible. But it was there, winding through the morning like smoke through timber. He set the coffee down on the railing, listening. At first, he thought it was the ghosts again, his mind playing tricks, like it sometimes did on the day he tried hardest to forget. But no. The sound grew stronger, clearer, a slow, familiar hymn. He stepped off the porch, boots creaking on the warped planks. Gravel cracked beneath his feet as he crossed the path toward the front gate, past the rusted bell that hadn't rung since the day Ellie died. 20 years ago, to the day, softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. The song cut through him like a knife dulled by age, but not by meaning. It had been Ellie's favourite, the one she used to hum while kneading bread or brushing her hair by the window. Hearing it again was like tasting a memory he never asked for. And then he saw them. 6 girls stood at the gate. No horses, no wagon, just dusty shoes and plain dresses, sunburnt cheeks, tangled hair. One held a guitar with a broken string. Another clutched a tin lunchbox like it held every treasure she owned. The littlest one, barely 10, swayed on her heels, the hymn tumbling out of her like it lived in her bones. He stared, unsure whether to be angry, afraid, or simply confused. He hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks, and certainly not a choir of young strangers. The song faltered when the smallest girl sang the wrong note and let out a giggle. That broke whatever trance they were all in. "All right," Harlan said, voice sharper than he intended. "Who sent you?" The tallest girl stepped forward, dark hair braided neatly, her chin up like she'd been through worse. "Nobody sent us, sir. We heard it was your birthday." Harlan stiffened. Town's got a big mouth. "We didn't mean any trouble," she said quickly. "We just thought maybe you'd like to hear a song today." He looked past them at the road. Nothing but heat, shimmer, and wind. No wagon, no adults. Just these 6 girls with voices too sweet for a world this mean. "You travelling alone?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the girl said. "You got names?" She hesitated a second. "I'm June." "These are my sisters, Lila, Annie, Tess, Maggie, and Fern." The littlest Fern peered up at him with eyes wide and innocent. "Do you got cake, mister?" Harlan blinked. "What?" "For your birthday," she said plainly. "Mama used to make carrot cake, even when we was moving." He let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been covered in 20 years of dust. "No cake here. I don't celebrate." "They said that too," June added quietly. "That you haven't for a long time." He narrowed his eyes. "You always go singing at strangers' gates?" June didn't flinch. "Only the ones who looked like they forgot how to listen." That hit harder than he expected. Harlan looked back toward the house. Empty porch, empty windows, empty everything. "The gate's not locked," he muttered. "If you're after water or shade, you can have both. But I don't have much use for music." He turned, expecting the girls to scatter like startled deer, but they didn't. They entered, one by one, quiet as shadows, eyes full of something he didn't know how to name. He led them to the porch without another word. They didn't ask for his name, and he didn't offer it. Inside, the house smelled of dust and pine, and time too long untouched. No decorations, no laughter, just silence, broken only by the creak of the floorboards beneath unfamiliar feet. The girls moved through the space with a strange gentleness, like they'd seen too many places not to respect the ones that still stood. Fern approached the mantel where a picture frame sat face down. She reached for it. "Don't," Harlan said, not loud, but firm, the kind of voice that stopped things. She stepped back, eyes wide. June stepped in then. "We can make something if you got flour, or beans, or apples," he grunted. "Pantry's got some food, not sure what's still good." That was all it took. The girls moved into the kitchen like they belonged to it. One peeled open the pantry door. Another found a dented can of peaches. Fern carried the tin lunchbox to the table like it was her duty. Harlan watched from his corner chair, unsure whether he was hosting a miracle or an invasion. But something inside him cracked, just a little. By midday, the cabin smelled of bread and peaches. The girls laughed softly. June swept the porch. Fern hummed to herself, sitting on the steps with bare feet kicking air. He didn't ask where they came from. Not yet. But they didn't feel like strangers anymore. And when June handed him a chipped plate with warm sweetbread, she looked him in the eye and said, "Happy birthday, mister." He didn't respond. He just sat down beside her on the porch, bread in his hand, watching 6 girls who didn't belong here feel like they did. And for the first time in 20 years, Harlan Reeves didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. The next morning, Harlan Reeves woke to the sound of soft footsteps on his porch. For a moment, he thought it was Ellie, back from the dead, humming her way across the worn boards with the sunrise in her hair. But then he remembered. Ellie had been gone 20 years, and the girls were real. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and pulled on his boots. The floor was cold under his feet. Outside, the light was still thin, just barely spilling over the ridge. Through the window, he saw June bent at the waist, sweeping the porch with a cracked broom like it was her job and not some kindness offered to a man she barely knew. He stepped out into the chill, arms crossed. She didn't flinch, just looked up with that steady gaze of hers and said, "Morning, Mr. Reeves." He hadn't told her his name. Not really. Not out loud. "You been up long?" he asked. She nodded. "Sun beat me to it, though." Behind her, Maggie and Tess were already in the kitchen, whispering over a pot of boiling water. Lila stood by the open door, slicing a bruised apple with the care of a surgeon. Annie was folding laundry on the rail, and Fern, small, wild-haired Fern, was barefoot again, chasing the wind with a feather clutched in one hand. He watched them with suspicion threaded through the cracks of something softer. He didn't like how natural they looked here, like they'd always been part of the place, like maybe he'd just forgotten. Inside, breakfast wasn't much. Flatbread, boiled peaches, some kind of bitter coffee June brewed in an old percolator Harlan hadn't touched in years. But they ate like it was a feast. No one fought, no one asked for more than their share. Even Fern waited her turn, licking syrup from her fingers like it was honey from heaven. Afterward, June stood, wiped her hands on her skirt, and looked at him. "We can help, if you got work that needs doing." He scoffed, more out of reflex than anything. "Ain't much here that needs saving." "Maybe not," she said. "But broken things still hold weight." Harlan didn't reply, just nodded toward the barn. Out there, the fences sagged, the gate hinges rusted, and the roof had more holes than a mining pan. But the girls didn't complain. They hauled what they could. Jo, stronger than she looked, found a hammer and started resetting the hinge on the side door. Lila and Tess lifted loose boards. Annie chased down stray tools blown out by the wind. Even Maggie, with her soft fingers and city-born stride, figured out how to coil rope without tangling it. And Fern, bless her, sat in the dirt talking to a chicken. By noon, Harlan found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. Smiling. He caught it only when the wind shifted and the sun glared off a tin bucket, throwing light straight into his eyes. Reflexively, he wiped the back of his hand across his mouth, like that might undo the betrayal, but the feeling stayed. That night, the girls cooked again, a stew, thin but hot. Wild onions, canned beans, whatever meat June could find. They laid out mismatched bowls and chipped spoons like it was a holiday. Harlan sat in his usual chair near the window, arms folded, eyes scanning everything like a soldier who'd forgotten peace. He didn't eat at the table. Not yet. Fern tiptoed over with a piece of flatbread curled around a smear of jam from the back of the pantry. "You should eat with us," she said. He looked down at her. She was small, too small to carry the weight she did in her eyes. "I'm fine here." "You always eat alone?" He didn't answer. She shrugged and climbed into Annie's lap without fuss. Harlan watched them huddle around that table, shoulder to shoulder, heads bent in, laughter rising like steam. A part of him itched to be annoyed by it, but it wouldn't take. Instead, he just listened. Listened to how they teased each other, how they hummed between bites, how June set her hand on Fern's back without even thinking. After supper, the girls cleared the dishes, and Joe started tuning the old guitar. The sound of metal against calloused fingers filled the room with something that didn't quite feel like music yet, but it wanted to be. June moved to the mantel again. This time, she looked directly at the picture frame still lying face down. She didn't touch it. "Was she the one who made birthdays matter?" she asked. Harlan's jaw tightened. "Her name was Ellie." "She your wife?" "Yeah." June nodded, nothing more. "I lost my mama 2 winters back. Took us a while to stop holding our breath every time the wind rattled a door." He didn't reply. "She died trying to protect us," June said softly. "We've been running since." The room went still, even the guitar quieted. "She was good," Fern added, voice like a whisper across a pond. "She sang better than anyone." "No one should die like that," Harlan said, the words low and worn. "No," June agreed, "but most do." They didn't talk much after that. Just let the quiet sit like an old friend who didn't need permission. That night, Harlan lit the lanterns himself, brought out extra blankets, set them by the barn door and nodded once. No words. The girls said thank you in their own way. Maggie fixed the ripped screen. Annie folded the towels without asking. Fern handed him a crooked drawing of a house with too many windows and a sun that smiled like it knew a secret. He took it, stared at it longer than he meant to, then pinned it on the wall near the sink. When the house finally fell silent, he sat by the fire, cup in hand, eyes open. The wind scraped against the cabin walls like it was trying to get in, but for the first time in 2 decades, he wasn't afraid of what the wind might bring. He was afraid of what might take this away. At dawn, the sound of hooves snapped him from half-sleep. Someone was coming. Not the girls. Not the wind. Trouble. He rose, slow and careful, and reached for the rifle by the door. Outside, dust curled under the morning sun as a black horse approached the gate. Broad shoulders, wide hat. A man sat high in the saddle, his face shadowed, but the posture told Harlan everything he needed to know. This wasn't a visit, it was a reckoning, and the girls were still asleep. He stepped onto the porch, fingers curled around cold steel, his heart already preparing for a fight he hadn't planned, but suddenly knew he was willing to have. Not this time. Not again. Not to them. Not to her. Not to anyone. The rider stopped 10 paces from the gate and called out, "You're housing 6 girls that don't belong to you." Harlan's voice was calm when it came. "No, but they're here, and that makes them mine to protect." Inside, the girls began to stir. Outside, the man grinned, and the sun rose on something far darker than light. Wade Mercer dismounted slow, like a man who knew time would bow to him. The dust rolled off his boots as he approached the gate, hands resting just close enough to his belt for Harlan to notice. He wasn't in a hurry, and that alone set off alarms in Harlan's mind. Men who didn't rush had power, or thought they did. "You Harlan Reeves?" Mercer asked, voice low and smooth like creek water hiding sharp rocks. "I am," Harlan answered, leveling his rifle but not pointing it directly. "And you are?" The man smirked. "Name's Mercer, Wade Mercer. You're holding someone belongs to me." Harlan felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. "I don't hold anyone. Don't play dumb. Little girl, Fern, she's mine." Inside the cabin, June had already ushered the others away from the window. The door creaked open behind Harlan, and she stepped onto the porch, her eyes never leaving Mercer. "She's not yours," June said, voice steady. Mercer's eyes narrowed. "June, always so full of fire, just like your mama." "Don't say her name," June snapped. Harlan's jaw tightened. "That true? He your kin?" June didn't answer right away. Her shoulders were stiff, hands clenched at her sides. "He was our stepfather. After Mama married him, everything changed. He drank, hit, took what he wanted. When Mama tried to leave, he made sure she couldn't." Mercer spat into the dirt. "She ran, took my child. That ain't legal." "She wasn't your child," June said, biting each word like it burned. "You beat her so hard she lost the baby before Fern was even born. Fern was Mama's last breath, not yours." Harlan kept the rifle steady but dropped his voice low. "You need to go, now." Mercer's expression didn't change. "I'm taking her back, Reeves. You got two choices. Hand her over or I come through that gate and get her myself." June stepped forward, but Harlan blocked her with one arm. "You step through that gate," Harlan said quietly, "and I shoot." A long silence stretched between them. Mercer wasn't a fool. Not entirely. He glanced around, noticed the fresh repairs on the fence, the patched roof, the signs of life. "This ain't over," he said finally. "I'll be back." "You bring the law," Harlan said, "or don't come back at all." Mercer mounted his horse and turned without another word, disappearing down the trail in a cloud of dust and menace. Once he was gone, June exhaled sharply. Her hands were trembling now, the fire in her voice replaced by a weight she could barely hold. "Didn't think he'd find us so soon," she murmured. Harlan turned to her. "You said you were running. How far did you come?" "From New Mexico. Stopped in 3 towns before here. Changed names, clothes, everything we could." "Why here?" June looked out over the field. "We heard about you. Folks said you hadn't spoken to another soul in years. Figured nobody would think to look." He studied her. "You were right. Until now." That night, the house was quiet, the air heavy. The girls ate, but no one spoke much. Fern curled up on the floor with a blanket and her tin box of treasures, some ribbon, a thimble, a picture she'd drawn of a house with flowers in the windows. Harlan sat by the fire, rifle across his lap, listening to the night. He knew men like Mercer. Dangerous, because they believed they were owed something. Worse, when the law didn't stop them. He'd seen it before. Good people torn up because no one stood in the way. He didn't want to fight another man's war. But now, it was his, like it or not. The next morning, Harlan took the girls outside. They needed to know how to defend themselves, and he needed to know they could. He lined up tin cans on the fence, handed the rifle to June. "You ever shoot before?" She nodded. "Mama taught me when I was 9. Said men don't listen unless you've got lead behind your voice." She hit the first can clean, missed the second, took a deep breath and hit the third. Each girl had a turn, some better than others. Annie flinched at the sound. Joe, tomboy to the bone, handled the rifle like a pro. Maggie refused at first, but eventually agreed to hold the weapon, trembling hands and all. Fern just watched, quiet, absorbing everything. "We don't go looking for a fight," Harlan said when they were done. "But we don't run either. Not again." Later that day, Harlan rode into town. Willow Bend wasn't much, just a strip of dry buildings clinging to the dirt road like they were afraid to let go. But it had what he needed: a lawyer. Or something close. Tom Ledger sat behind the counter at the general store, retired court clerk turned advice man for folks who couldn't afford the real thing. He wore suspenders that hadn't held anything up in years and a pair of cracked reading glasses. "Well, I'll be," Tom said when Harlan walked in. "Didn't think I'd see you above ground again." "I need your help," Harlan said, "and I don't got time for pleasantries." Tom leaned back. "That's serious, huh? There's a man claiming custody over a girl that ain't his. He's dangerous. Got the law on his side, maybe. I need to know what we're up against." Tom's eyes narrowed. "You taking them in?" "They're already in." Tom nodded slowly. "You got 2 weeks before he files a formal claim with the county. Maybe less if he's got someone in his pocket." "I need to buy time." Tom scratched his beard. "Then you better find someone who's seen what that man's capable of. Witnesses, anyone. I got 6 girls with more scars than birthdays. That enough?" "Not for court," Tom said. "You'll need someone outside their bloodline, someone the judge don't think is just carrying a grudge." Harlan looked toward the door. "I'll find 'em." As he left the store, he noticed a shadow moving down the alley behind the saloon. Quick, nervous. He followed. It was Ezra, the boy who'd helped June carry water that first day. Shy, maybe 17, with a limp in his right leg. "You following me?" Harlan asked. Ezra shook his head. "No, sir. I know that man, Mercer. He passed through last year, stayed at the stables, heard things." "Bad things?" Ezra nodded. "He beat a mule so bad the owner almost shot him. Took his temper out on a boy, too. Would have killed him if someone hadn't stepped in." "You willing to say that in court?" Ezra hesitated, then nodded again. "For her? For Fern?" "Yeah." Harlan clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You're a brave kid." As he rode back, the clouds above Willow Bend thickened. A storm was coming, not just the kind that brought rain, but the kind that tore things apart. At the gate, June waited, her face unreadable. "He'll come back," she said. Not a question. A fact. "I know," Harlan answered. "We'll be ready." Inside the cabin, Fern drew a new picture. This time, the house had a big tree out front and 6 girls on the porch. A man sat in a chair, rifle on his lap, but he was smiling. And in the sky, she drew the sun again, but this time it wasn't smiling, it was watching. Harlan spent the next week transforming his forgotten ranch into a place that could hold off more than memories. The girls worked like they'd been raised on labor. June and Joe focused on the barn, reinforcing doors, checking locks, securing windows with metal scraps scavenged from old tool sheds. Annie and Lila patched holes in the chicken coop and gathered eggs every morning like it was a sacred ritual. Maggie organized the pantry, rationing food and checking supplies like she was born for order. And Fern stayed near the porch, drawing pictures with sticks in the dirt, keeping watch with wide, knowing eyes. Ezra came every afternoon, walking with that limp of his, offering what help he could. He brought extra rope, fishing line, nails, even a hammer his father didn't know was missing. He and Joe built a new latch for the main gate. Harlan noticed the way he looked at June when he thought no one was watching. Nobody spoke of Mercer, but his name hung in the air like the taste of blood you can't spit out. They were waiting for the next knock, the next shot, the next move. And waiting, Harlan knew, would break them if they didn't do something more than survive. So he taught them. Each morning before breakfast, he lined them up behind the barn and ran drills. Shooting, yes, but more than that, how to move quietly, how to stay low, how to hide a small child in seconds, how to read boot tracks, how to spot fresh prints from old ones. June learned fast. Joe was already faster. Annie struggled, but she didn't quit. Lila had a sharp eye, caught details no one else saw. Maggie's hands shook with the rifle, but she hit her target by the third day. And Fern asked if trees could remember footsteps. Harlan told her yes, and she believed him. That was enough. One evening, after the sun sank into the red hills, June brought him a folded piece of paper. "Ezra got this from a friend who works at the telegraph office," she said. It was a notice. Mercer had filed paperwork. Custody claim, filed in Mesa County. The hearing was in 12 days. Harlan stared at the print. Legal words, clean and cold. There it was. He hadn't been bluffing. "We'll go," June said. "If we don't show, the judge might rule against us anyway." "You think he'll play fair?" "No," she said. "But I think we will." Harlan didn't sleep much that night. He sat by the fire, rifle leaning against the arm of his chair, and listened to the house breathe. It wasn't empty anymore, not cold. It creaked in different ways now. Light footsteps, muffled laughter, the occasional hiss of a kettle long forgotten. And then, in the quiet of that firelight, Harlan made a decision. The next morning, he rode to the edge of town, to the house with the blue shutters and the dog that never barked. That's where Tom Ledger lived, and if anyone could walk them through a courthouse war, it was him. "You need to prep them," Harlan said, hat in hand. "Like witnesses, like soldiers." Tom nodded. "Never done nothing like this before, but I'll try." They held practice sessions in the barn. Tom played judge and jury. June practiced answering questions with calm, clipped words. "Yes, Your Honor." "No, sir. I understand." She rehearsed what she saw, what she remembered, how she protected Fern, how she pulled Maggie from Mercer's grasp during one of his rages. Joe told how she used to sleep with a hammer under her pillow. Annie described how their mama would count down the seconds before Mercer slammed the door open, giving the girls just enough time to scatter. Maggie hesitated the first time she spoke. Her voice caught on her name. Tom gently said, "Take your time." She did. Fern didn't speak at all. "She's too young," June said. "I won't put her through it." "She might not have to," Tom said, "but the judge may ask." Harlan crouched beside Fern later that evening, where she sat drawing under the kitchen table. "You don't gotta talk," he said. "But if you do, no one will let him hurt you again." Fern looked up at him, serious and still. "If I tell the truth, will that be enough?" "I hope so," he said. She nodded and went back to her drawing. That night, they sat together on the porch. The first night they all chose not to pretend they weren't afraid. June held a mug of tea. Ezra leaned against the post next to Joe, quiet and loyal. Harlan smoked a pipe for the first time in years. "Did you ever fight like this before?" June asked. "Different kind of fight," he replied. "Still hurt just as much." "What happened?" Harlan stared into the dark. "Lost a piece of myself. Left it somewhere. I can't get back." Silence followed, heavy but not unkind. "Do you think we'll win?" Maggie asked. "I think we'll stand," Harlan said. "Whatever comes." On the 10th day, they packed what they could into Harlan's old wagon. Food, blankets, fresh clothes. Ezra borrowed his father's mule team and offered to ride with them. "It's a day and a half to Mesa," he said. "We'll camp once along the way." June hesitated. What if he's already there, waiting? Harlan pulled back the tarp covering the side of the wagon. Beneath it, a rifle, a hatchet, a coil of rope, and a Bible. "He can wait," he said. "So can we." They left before dawn. The sky was still dark when they passed the edge of Willow Bend. No one saw them off. No one knew they were leaving. But as they rode, the girls sang quietly, not hymns this time, but old folk tunes their mama used to hum. The rhythm of wheels and hoofbeats matched their voices. It felt like a funeral and a beginning. When they reached the edge of the ridge, Harlan turned back once, looking over the land. The ranch sat quiet, holding its breath. He didn't know what they'd returned to, but he knew what they were riding toward. A courtroom, a verdict, and a man who thought the world still owed him something cruel. He wasn't ready to forgive the past, but he was ready to face it. For them, for Fern, for the life they might still have. The courthouse in Mesa stood like a stone giant among smaller, sun-bleached buildings. It was old, but still sharp at the edges, a reminder that not all scars fade with time. As the wagon rolled to a stop in front of it, Harlan could feel the tension ripple through the girls like a wave. June sat upright beside him, her jaw tight. Fern clung to Maggie in the back, wide-eyed and silent. "Everyone take a breath," Harlan said. "In through your nose, out slow." Joe muttered, "I'd rather have a gun than a breath." "You've got both," he said. They entered through the wide oak doors, the kind that echoed every step like a drumbeat. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old paper, and the kind of silence people didn't want to break. A clerk pointed them toward the courtroom without looking up from his ledger. Tom Ledger met them by the double doors. He'd dressed up, a brown suit too tight in the shoulders, a tie that looked like it hadn't seen light in 20 years. "You all ready?" June nodded. "As we'll ever be." The courtroom was half full, mostly townsfolk, curious, bored, nosy, a few ranchers, a preacher. Harlan spotted Ezra in the back row, hat in his lap, eyes locked on June. The judge, a woman named Clara Hawthorne, entered without fanfare. Her robe was plain, her gaze not. She didn't smile. Mercer was already seated on the other side, flanked by a lawyer slicker than fresh oil. Mercer wore clean clothes and a smirk, his bruised pride hidden under good grooming and legal papers. He didn't look at the girls. He looked at Harlan. The smirk didn't last. Judge Hawthorne's gavel struck once. "This is a custody hearing regarding a minor child, Fern. I'll hear from both parties." The lawyer spoke first. Words like parental rights, protective custody, and stability tumbled out in smooth, practiced rhythm. He called Mercer a grieving stepfather, a victim of a broken home, a man trying to reunite with the only family he had left. Harlan's blood boiled, but he kept his mouth shut. This part wasn't his. When the judge called June, she walked forward like she was stepping onto a battlefield. She held her chin high and hands still. Her voice didn't shake. She told them everything, not in gory detail, just the truth, plain and cold. About their mother, the bruises, the fear, the nights hiding in barns or under porches, about how Mercer would drink until he forgot their names, then rage because they hadn't said goodnight properly. About Fern being born into that world and their mama dying not long after. "I raised her," June said. "Not because I wanted to, because I had to." The judge asked, "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" June swallowed. "We tried, twice. They sent us back, said it was a family matter." Tom called Ezra next. The boy was nervous, but his voice didn't crack. He told about the time Mercer nearly beat a stable hand to death over a debt, about how he bragged that he'd get his girl back, no matter who had to bleed for it. Then Tom asked Fern to come forward. There was a long pause. Harlan was ready to object, to step in, to stop it. But Fern stood up before anyone could. She walked slowly to the front, in that quiet way only children carry when the world has taught them too much too soon. The judge looked at her gently. "Do you know why you're here today?" Fern nodded. "Because he wants to take me." "And who is he?" She pointed. "Wade Mercer." The judge hesitated. "Do you know who June is to you?" "She's my big sister, and my mama, and my home." "Do you remember living with Mr. Mercer?" Fern's lips pressed together. Then she nodded. He smells like broken glass. A hush fell over the courtroom. Can you tell me what that means? The judge asked. Fern glanced at June, then back. It means he only looks nice when the light hits him right. But inside, he's sharp. And if you get too close, you'll bleed. Judge Hawthorne sat very still. Tom didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The lawyer tried to recover, questioning Fern's age, her ability to understand legal terms, the credibility of a child, but the damage was done. That single phrase, he smells like broken glass, was already etched in everyone's mind. They broke for recess before the judge's ruling. Outside on the courthouse steps, the girls clustered together. Fern held Harlan's hand without asking. June paced. Joe stood guard. Ezra passed around a flask of water and didn't try to say anything comforting. You did good, Harlan told Fern. She looked up at him. Do you think she believed me? I know she did. Back inside, Judge Hawthorne read her ruling without hesitation. Guardianship of Fern will be granted to June. Mr. Mercer's claim is denied. Mercer leapt to his feet. She's a kid! She doesn't get to choose! The gavel slammed down. You're done, Mr. Mercer. One more word, and I'll have you removed. The lawyer grabbed Mercer's arm, trying to quiet him, but it was too late. The mask had cracked. Outside, the girls exhaled for the first time in days. June wrapped Fern in her arms. Maggie cried openly. Annie kissed the top of Joe's head, and Joe didn't even flinch. Harlan stood back and let them have the moment. Then he noticed Mercer, across the square, staring, not defeated, planning. Their eyes met. Mercer smiled. It wasn't over. Not yet. On the ride home, no one sang. The wind picked up as the wagon creaked across the open land, carrying dust and the scent of rain. But it wasn't just weather brewing. Back at the ranch, the gate was ajar. The screen door swayed open. Inside, the house had been ransacked. Furniture overturned. Cabinets open. One of Fern's drawings was torn in half and pinned to the mantel with a knife. Harlan stepped inside first, shotgun raised, but no one was there. Just silence. And a warning. Joe picked up the paper and turned it over. One word was scratched in the back in blocky, angry letters. Mine. The girls looked at Harlan. He looked out the window, jaw set, heart thudding like war drums in his chest. We prepare, he said. No more hiding. No one argued. Not this time. The ranch didn't sleep after that. Harlan lit every lamp and kept the fire burning through the night. The girls moved room to room, repairing what they could, eyes flicking toward the windows at every gust of wind. Fear had a scent, and it lingered heavy in the air, oil and smoke, and something raw, like blood under the skin. Mercer's message had been clear. He wasn't finished, and this time he wasn't coming through legal doors. Joe doubled the locks on the barn. Ezra stayed the night, rifle resting across his knees, seated just inside the front door. Harlan gave him a nod. There was no need for words between men who understood what was coming. June checked on Fern every hour, whispering soft reassurances that barely held back the quake in her voice. You're safe. We're all here. Fern didn't cry. She didn't sleep much either. By morning, the ranch looked like a fortress, windows barricaded, tools turned into weapons. The girls moved in pairs, never alone, never without a weapon close by. Maggie boiled water over the stove. Annie kept a knife in her boot. Even Lila, usually so gentle, started sleeping with a hatchet under her pillow. Harlan went into town just once. He bought extra shells, oil for the lanterns, salt for the windowsills, an old frontier superstition that June didn't question. The sheriff offered little. You want protection, best you protect yourselves. Town can't move fast enough out that far. He'd expected as much. 2 days passed, then 3. Then, just after midnight on the 4th day, the dogs barked. No one kept dogs on the ranch, but the sound echoed from the hill. A warning. Ezra jolted awake from the floor. Joe was already at the window, rifle in hand. Harlan walked to the door, opened it slowly. The night was moonless, shadows heavy and full, footsteps in the distance. Then the glint of something metal, too controlled to be moonlight. A lantern. Positions, Harlan said quietly. They moved fast. Joe and Ezra took the barn loft. June and Maggie stayed with Fern in the root cellar. Annie, Lila, and Harlan braced the front room. The first knock wasn't on the door. It was the sound of wood breaking at the back of the barn. Then silence, then a scream. It wasn't one of the girls. Joe's voice rang out. "One down!" Gunfire followed, short, sharp bursts. Not wild, trained. They were professionals, not Mercer's usual kind of men. Harlan realized then, Mercer had money, connections. He wasn't sending drunks, he was sending soldiers. One of the front windows shattered. A man climbed halfway in before Lila slammed the butt of her shotgun into his head. He dropped without a sound. Another broke through the back. Annie stabbed at him with a broken hoe, catching him in the ribs. He screamed. Harlan finished him with one clean shot. Blood splattered the walls. Maggie screamed from below, then quieted. June's voice carried up. "We're okay." Ezra fired from the loft, took out a shadow moving toward the well. Joe reloaded without flinching. Another shot cracked from the far fence. Then silence again. Too much silence. Then a voice. Mercer. He didn't shout, didn't rage. He spoke calmly, clearly, just beyond the edge of the front yard. "You can't keep her forever, Reeves. She ain't yours." Harlan stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "She ain't yours either." Mercer stood just beyond the light. His eyes were hollow in the shadows, something ancient in his stance. Rage and entitlement twisted into one. "You think you won in court?" Mercer spat. "Paper don't mean anything when there's no one left to read it." Behind him, 2 more men flanked the fence. They were waiting for a signal. "I got 6 girls here," Harlan said. "Each of them would rather die than go back with you." "They won't have to die," Mercer said. "Only you." And with that, he raised his hand. Gunfire erupted. Ezra took one in the shoulder. He fell backward, groaning but alive. Joe dragged him behind the hay bales, returning fire in bursts. Lila kept the front door pinned shut while Harlan stepped out into the yard. He didn't bother hiding. Mercer wanted a showdown. "Come out then," Harlan called. "If you want blood, you'll earn it." Mercer moved first, pulling a revolver and charging forward. Harlan aimed, fired once. The shot grazed Mercer's arm, spinning him sideways. A man from the side fence rushed the porch, but Annie was there. She slammed the door into him, knocking him down the steps. Maggie, shaking, dropped boiling water from the second-floor window onto another intruder. His scream echoed down the valley. Then June appeared, shotgun in her arms, eyes bright and cold. "Leave," she shouted, "or we end it here." Mercer groaned, crawling through the dirt. His men hesitated. Their plan was crumbling. One of them ran, then another. Soon it was just Mercer, bleeding and breathless, alone in the dust. Harlan stood over him, rifle aimed down. "I should finish it," he said. Mercer coughed. "You won't." "You're still a man of law." "I was," Harlan replied. "Then men like you showed me what law really protects." He pulled back, but didn't fire. Instead, he nodded at Joe. She stepped forward, hands shaking but steady enough to take Mercer's weapon. Annie kicked his knife away. By dawn, the sheriff came. The town had heard the shots. This time, there was no hesitation. Mercer was arrested for trespassing, attempted murder, and 6 other charges they'd waited too long to make stick. As they loaded him into the wagon, he spat blood and dirt. "She'll never be yours." Harlan didn't answer. June wrapped Fern in her arms and held her close. "She's mine. She's all of ours." The sheriff tipped his hat. "You'll testify?" "We all will," Harlan said. Back inside the house, the sun filtered through the broken windows. Blood stained the floorboards. Smoke still hung in the corners, but they were alive. The girls gathered around the table, battered but breathing. Maggie wept silently. Ezra, pale but smiling, held a cloth to his shoulder. Fern climbed onto Harlan's lap and rested her head against his chest. He didn't push her away. "We're safe now," she whispered. "For now," he replied, "and for whatever comes next." Outside, the wind shifted, no longer threatening, just passing through. The days following the attack settled into a rhythm marked by silence, wounds, and the sound of nails being driven into wood. The ranch, though damaged, stood firm, a stubborn structure built to endure storms both natural and human. But inside the house, the air remained thick with something no hammer could fix. Ezra lay on the couch with his arm in a sling, pale but recovering. Joe barely left his side. June hardly slept, patrolling the property with Harlan twice a day. They repaired fences, checked for footprints, cleaned out bloodstains as best they could. The smell of gunpowder still clung to the floorboards. The knife mark on the mantel stayed, even after Maggie tried sanding it out. Mercer was locked up in Mesa under maximum security, but no one believed he was truly finished, not even the sheriff. "Man like that has people," the sheriff had warned before riding off. "I'll do what I can, but you best stay sharp." So they stayed sharp. June trained harder. Annie kept maps of the property pinned above the fireplace. Lila carved wooden whistles for the younger girls, emergency signals. Maggie catalogued every item they had in the pantry and started storing jars in the cellar like a war was coming. And Fern changed. She didn't speak as much. She followed Harlan everywhere, sometimes without saying a word for hours. He didn't mind. They'd formed a quiet rhythm, her presence a shadow, her trust offered not in words but in proximity. She sat on the porch while he cleaned his rifle. She handed him nails while he fixed a broken shutter. She slept in the armchair near the fire when nightmares kept her from the cellar. One afternoon, as they sat watching clouds roll in over the distant ridge, she looked up at him. "Will he come back?" Harlan didn't lie. "He might try." Fern nodded like that answer was what she expected. "But next time," she said, "I want to be the one who stops him." He turned to her. "Stopping him doesn't mean becoming like him." She didn't respond, just went back to drawing in the dirt with a stick, sketching what looked like a house surrounded by trees. There was a sun in the corner again, but this time it wore a frown. That night, June and Harlan talked on the porch while the others slept. "I keep thinking it's over," she said, "that we won, but it doesn't feel like winning." "It's not," Harlan said. "It's surviving. Winning comes later, if it comes at all." He looked at her, the firelight dancing across her face, those tired eyes too old for her age. "You gave those girls a life." "You fought for it. That's worth something." She turned away. "They still live like they're waiting to run. Maybe, but they're here. That's a start." The next morning, a letter arrived by courier. Harlan took it from the boy without a word. The envelope was thick, expensive, and unmarked. Inside was a folded document, a court notice written in dense legal language. Mercer had filed an appeal. The ink still smelled fresh. "He's trying again," Harlan told the girls. "Different angle this time, claiming unlawful detainment, some nonsense about state jurisdiction." "Can he win?" Maggie asked, her voice shaking. "He can drag it out," June said, reading over his shoulder. "He's looking for another crack." Harlan didn't say it aloud, but they all knew. Mercer wasn't fighting for Fern anymore. He was fighting not to lose. Men like him didn't care about the child. They cared about control. "We need to end this," June said. "Not in court, not on paper. For good." "You're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting," Harlan said. "I don't want to kill him," she replied, "but I want to make sure he can't keep reaching for us." Later that night, as they gathered for supper, Ezra spoke up. "There's a man I know, works over near Bitter Ridge, used to run with Mercer, got out when things got ugly. He might have something we can use." "Something like what?" Joe asked. "Evidence. Something solid. Something that sticks." June nodded. "Where is he now?" "Camped north, past the canyon. Only comes into town twice a month." "I'll go," June said. "No," Harlan interrupted. "I'll go." June bristled. "You don't even know the man." "I don't have to. I've met enough like him." They argued for an hour, but in the end, June relented. Harlan packed light: rifle, extra shells, water, a bit of dried meat. Joe lent him a knife. Fern handed him one of her drawings, this one of the ranch with tall trees all around it, like a castle with roots. "Come back," she said softly. "I always do," he replied. He rode out at dawn, the sky smeared with pale orange and streaks of silver. The land opened wide before him, dust, silence, wind. He moved fast, only stopping once to check the trail and water the horse. By sundown, he reached the canyon, just as Ezra had described. There was a campfire up ahead, flickering between two jagged rocks. A man sat beside it, lean and ragged, chewing tobacco and staring into the flames. Harlan approached slowly. "Name's Caleb," the man said without looking up. "You're here about Mercer." Harlan stopped. "That obvious? You look like someone who lost more than he wants to admit." "That's true," Harlan said. "And I'd like to stop losing." Caleb finally looked up. His face was scarred, weathered, one eye milky white from an old injury. "I got a ledger," he said. "Names, transactions, Mercer's dealings, some legal, some not. Enough to ruin him 3 ways from Sunday." "Why haven't you turned it in?" "Because men like Mercer don't stay buried unless someone shovels the dirt themselves." "I'll shovel," Harlan said. Caleb pulled a battered journal from his saddlebag and tossed it over. "Be careful," he said. "Paper cuts deeper than bullets in the right hands." Harlan rode back under a sky laced with stars. The journal felt heavier than it looked. Inside were names, places, dates, payments, bribes, connections that Mercer had spent years hiding, enough to bury him. When Harlan returned, June was waiting by the gate. He handed her the book. She flipped through it, her mouth set hard. "We take this to the judge?" "Not yet," Harlan said. "First, we let him know we have it." "And then?" "Then," Harlan said, "he finally learns what it feels like to be hunted." She nodded, eyes shining in the dark. For the first time, they weren't just defending, they were taking the fight back. The letter was handwritten, sealed in red wax, and delivered not by a courier, but pinned to the door of the Willow Bend courthouse. It was addressed to Judge Clara Hawthorne, but copies had found their way into the hands of every clerk, deputy, and councilman in the county within 2 days. Inside the envelope was the ledger. Alongside it, a brief note, unsigned. "This is who he is. If the law means anything, now is the time to prove it." By the end of the week, Mercer was no longer awaiting trial. He was under federal investigation. The charges piled up like storm clouds: fraud, bribery, smuggling, witness tampering, 2 disappearances linked to missing laborers on one of his properties. The sheriff, previously hesitant to act without direct orders, now had a dozen marshals behind him. Mercer was transferred to a holding facility outside of Yuma under maximum surveillance. No bond, no options. He didn't go quietly. But this time, his voice fell on deaf ears. When the telegram arrived confirming the charges, Harlan stood on the porch, reading it in the early morning light. The girls gathered around slowly, sensing something had shifted in the world, something final. June took the paper from his hand, read it twice, then folded it and pressed it to her chest. "Is it over?" Annie asked. No one answered right away. Harlan finally said, "For now, it is." They didn't celebrate, not with shouting or song, just a long silence that felt heavier than grief, but cleaner somehow. A silence earned. The following days were filled with mending, not just wood and rope and fences, but people. Ezra's shoulder healed. Joe taught him how to reload one-handed. Annie started humming again while she worked, soft tunes that made the mornings feel warm. Maggie planted new flowers along the walkway, purple and white, just beneath the window Fern always looked out of. June stopped waking in the middle of the night. Harlan, though, he still did. But it was different now. He didn't wake choking on grief or rage. He woke quietly, early, before the sun, and walked the edge of the property with a mug of coffee and the sound of a life returning to itself. One morning, just before the first frost, June found him staring at the old barn, eyes narrowed like he was trying to see something invisible. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked. He shook his head. "Used to think I already had, just forgot to take my boots off." She smiled at that, rare and real. "Well, we're staying, if that's all right." He looked at her, not as a girl he'd rescued, but as the woman she was becoming. "It's your land now," he said. "That deed's in your name. You can do what you want with it." Her face went still. "I thought you'd change your mind." "No," he said. "I was just waiting to make sure you'd stay long enough to deserve it." Later that week, the girls made plans. But the schoolhouse in Willow Bend was reopening in spring. Annie wanted to go back. Maggie started sewing again, selling her work to shopkeepers in town. Lila began sketching plans for a garden they could live off of through the next winter. And Fern wrote a book. It was just a collection of pages at first, scribbles, drawings, stories, but it grew. She titled it The House That Stayed and dedicated it to Harlan. "For showing me the world doesn't end just because someone tried to end it." When she handed it to him, he didn't speak for a long time, just held the pages like they were made of glass. Then he placed them beside the picture of Ellie he'd finally set upright on the mantel. The day before his 61st birthday, the girls disappeared. Not in fear, not like before, but in mischief. He woke to an empty house, a cold stove, and a single note pinned to the door. "Stay on the porch. No peeking. Love your troublemakers." He obeyed. Sat in his usual chair, coffee warm between his hands, eyes on the hills. It was an hour before he heard them. Singing. 6 voices, clear and soft, rising over the land just like they had that first day, only stronger now, bolder. Not a hymn this time, but a song Fern had written. Simple words, sweet melody, something about home and hope and doors that never closed again. They came around the bend, carrying baskets. June led the way, wearing a paper crown. Joe had a lopsided cake. Annie held balloons that squeaked in the wind. Maggie had sewn a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Papa." He tried not to cry. Failed completely. Fern climbed into his lap without asking. "We figured, you're ours now, if you want to be." He kissed the top of her head. "I do." They ate cake on the porch, laughed, told stories they'd never had the space to tell before. Harlan listened more than he spoke, memorizing every detail like he didn't want to miss a second. That night, the house was quiet again, but not hollow. He walked room to room, checking windows, locking doors out of habit. When he reached the mantel, he paused. Beside Ellie's photo was Fern's book, The crown June had made, and a single drawing, a house with trees, 6 girls, and a man sitting on a porch with a coffee mug and a smile. He stood there a while, the fire low behind him, the wind soft outside. And for the first time in 20 years, Harlan Reeves turned off the lanterns, went to bed, and slept without his rifle by the door.